we knew was going to happen, has happened. Israel will board that ship, it'll tow them away. Today who are Poland. In the 18th century, there was international outrage over the partition of Poland between Prussia, Russia, and I think the Austro-Hungarian Empire. In 1931, when there was the great Polish uprising against Russian rule, again, the cause of Polish freedom captured the hearts and the imaginations of people of goodwill all over Europe and even in North America. Same thing happened in 1956 in Miami. In 1956, when I was almost 13-year-old in Hungary, there were the demonstrations and the workers' movement in Poznan, and there were demonstrations in Budapest, student demonstrations that went to the statue of General Bam in solidarity with the Polish demonstrators. And that began the Hungarian Revolution of 1956, which ended up, of course, being suppressed by the Soviet army, and that's when my family and I, over again, when it mattered who sided with justice and who sided with power. What makes moments such as this one so dangerous, so clarifying, is that one way or the other, everyone is forced to answer. Now, what is actually happening in Palestine, and why am I interested in it? I'm a Zionist, and Zionism seemed the perfect answer. You see, when you are part of a minority and you are discriminated against and you are excluded, which I experienced in Hungary growing up. I remember one time some kids were attacking me for being Jewish, and one of my friends came. Thank you very much. It's a fault, but it's not his fault. Now, the American psychologist, a black American psychologist, Ken Hardy, talks about what he calls the assaulted sense of self. And the assaulted sense of self is when the victim of trauma, whether that's an individual or whether that's a whole people, but they take on the view of themselves that the perpetrator has of them. So black people in the United States would be ashamed of being black. They used to be ashamed of having curly hair. They would put toxic substances in their hair to try and straighten it. to look more like the white man. They would try and whiten their skin. And Malcolm X, the great black leader, said, and he did that to himself. He would burn his scalp to make his hair straighter. And then when he woke up, he said to his people, who taught you to hate the size of your lips, the shape of your nose, the texture of your hair, the color of your skin? And that's the assaulted sense of self. So I grew up with this assaulted sense of self around being Jewish. And Zionism, which I discovered in my teens, was the perfect answer. Oh God, yes, we can now take pride in who we are. We can redeem 2,000 years of history. We can be strong. We can protect ourselves. It made perfect sense. And it was a point of pride. Until there came another disillusionment. Now, I don't know what word you have in Polish for disillusionment, but an English word is interesting, disillusionment. People say, oh, I got disillusioned. And I say to people, that's good. Would you rather be illusioned, or would you rather be disillusioned? Would you rather believe in stories and myths and fairy tales, or would you like to know reality? And the trouble with most people in most places, whether it comes to politics or personal life, people have a great difficulty letting go of their illusions. And for some reason I didn't. And once I found out what happened in Palestine, about which I'll say something more in a moment, how could I be a Zionist any longer? How could I support that anymore? So I've been there 3 times now. First time during the first Intifada, I went there along with an American group to look at the medical system under the occupation. And I'm telling you, I cried every day for 2 weeks. Every day I wept at what I saw then, over 40 years ago now. I should say over 30 years ago now. And then I was there in 2022 to the West Bank. I was asked to go there by some Israeli and Palestinian psychologists to give a workshop for Palestinian women suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of having been tortured in Israeli jails. And when we hear about the Israeli hostages these days, well, yeah, it's not right that civilians and women and children and old people should have been taken hostage. It's not right. But does anybody talk about the tens of thousands of Palestinian hostages that have been through Israeli jails over the last 20, 30 years? Over 10,000 right now. And they're tortured. They're tortured when they're 13 years old and when they're 14 years old. And that torture has been documented by Israeli organizations. Do we ever hear about that here in the West? So I went there to work with these women with their PTSD. And I was there for a week. There was a film made at the time. You can find it online. It's called Where Olive Trees Weep. It's not just about me. It's, in fact, mostly it's not about me. It's about the occupation. It's a beautiful film, Where the Olive Trees Weep. Amir Haas, she's in it too. And I was told there's no post-traumatic stress disorder here because the trauma is never post. It's ongoing. Now this year, a book is being published by a Dr. Sama Jabbar, who is used to be the head of psychiatry, mental health for Palestine. And I wrote the foreword. I was asked to write the foreword for her book, which I was honored to do. In this book, she gives one example. She says, "What do I do with a suicidal 81-year-old who, with his own hands, 20, 30 years ago, built a home, and now he's forced with his own hands to dismantle it. Because you see, what happens is the Palestinians don't get authorization to build homes on their own lands. They don't get authorization to dig wells on their own lands. If you go to the Jewish settlements, they have swimming pools. The Palestinians can't dig wells in their own land. So if I, as a Jew, travel to Ben Gurion Airport tomorrow, then by Monday, tomorrow's Monday, then by Tuesday, I could be an Israeli citizen because I'm a Jew. By Wednesday, I could move to the occupied territories and be given subsidized housing with a swimming pool, while a Palestinian who was born there can't even visit. That's the reality. You know what the reality is? This is an article in the New York Times. Twice a year, the New York Times tells the truth. It's very hard for them that sometimes they manage. Settlers come and they damage and they destroy Palestinian homes. In one particular village, there was a settler pogrom where Palestinians were hurt and they were expelled and their homes were damaged. When the pogrom is over, they come back. And a representative of the Israeli occupation shows up and says, "Oh, you can move back into your home, but you can't fix it. So you see, there's a hole in your roof because the settlers destroy your roof. And now it's winter time, and the cold rain is falling, but you can't even put a plastic tarp on your ceiling because that would be construction without a license. So you have to apply for a license. But if you get it, which you won't, it's going to take months. In the meanwhile, you and your family can sit in that living room in the cold rain." And this is just the kind of stuff that the Western press never reports. Well, the New York Times reported it one time. It goes on every day. It goes on every day. Now, as to the present situation, let me just read you a few quotes. Like there's this lie that if you speak out against Israel or against Zionism, that makes you an anti-Semite. That means you hate Jews. Well, there might be some people that use their criticism of Israel as a cover, as a camouflage for their anti-Jewish sentiments. I just haven't seen too many of those people. I haven't met them. If they exist, maybe they do, but I don't know where. And I'm sure some, that's not true. I've seen it in Hungary. I've seen a very right-wing group who all of a sudden became consumed by Palestinian rights. Well, they didn't give a damn about Palestinians. It was an anti-Jewish demonstration. It's true, it can happen, but not for the most part. And for the most part, it's just ideological terrorism to tell people that they mustn't speak for Palestinian justice and Palestinian freedom because if they do, they're being anti-Semites. So let's just say what some Israelis say. This is the great Israeli journalist Gideon Levy, who wrote last week. He said, "The Israel Defense Forces of the past 20 months is an army of slaughter like the world has never seen. An army paving the way for genocide and population transfer. It destroys and takes pride and kills and preens. It's proud of what it does." That's what he wrote. this business of, is this a genocide? And what you often hear is that to call this a genocide is a blood libel against the Jewish people. It's like in the Middle Ages when Jews were accused of killing Christian kids to make their sacred bread. It's a blood libel. Well, it so happens that at least 4 internationally renowned Jewish Israeli scholars of genocide who have all served in the Israel Defense Forces have pronounced what Israel is doing right now, meeting the international legal criteria for genocide. These are Israelis, these are Jews, these are former army members. They're calling it genocide, according to their interpretation of international law. Nobody talks about that here in the West. Well, when I say here in the West, I'm mostly familiar with North America, but I doubt that they speak about it here. There was a petition 2 weeks ago by 1,300 Israeli academics. They talked about this horrifying litany of war crimes and crimes against humanity. We cannot claim that we did not know. We have been silent for too long. Now this business I did not know, after the war, all the Germans, I didn't know. Well, maybe they didn't know the full details because the Nazis went to a lot of trouble to keep the concentration camps and the death camps secret. But they certainly saw the Jews being taken away. They certainly saw Kristallnacht. They certainly saw the anti-Semitic laws. They could not claim that they did not know. Albert Speer was the architect for Hitler, and he was the economic minister. And after the Second World War, he was sentenced for war crimes, spent 20 years in Spandau prison. And Speer wrote in his autobiography that the question everybody's asking is, what did you know? What did you know? And he said, that's not the right question. The right question is, what should you have known, what you could have known if you'd wanted to? And he describes 2 incidents. One is when he's visiting a factory, Krupp or Thyssen, one of these German corporations that use slave labor. So in this factory, there's Jewish slave laborers. And he asked some of them, would you rather be here or would you rather be in the camps? And they looked at him in horror. And he said, I never asked them why. And he said, then I met with a Wehrmacht German general once, and I told him I'd like to visit the East, meaning Poland, one day. And the general says, you don't want to go to the East. And Speer said, I could have asked why not, but I didn't. Now these days, nobody can claim that they couldn't have known, because it's all over TikTok, it's all over Instagram, it's all over social media. And let's face it, some of it is even in the actual news. Who this day can claim that they did not know what was going on? Who can claim that they did not know? So the Israeli academics said, we cannot claim we did not know. We have been silent too long. The former Prime Minister of Israel, Ehud Olmert, said recently, yes, Israel is committing war crimes. And one of the leaders of the opposition parties, and I don't have a lot of respect for any of the Zionist parties, but he said that Gaza, the Israeli army, are killing babies as a hobby. Well, first of all, my question is, are these statements by these Israelis even reported here in the West? Do we even know about them? And if not, then why not? If not, then why not? Now, I've been asked about trauma to some degree. And as I said earlier, trauma can happen both on the individual but also on the collective level. There's no question that in Eastern Europe there's been a lot of collective trauma. And that collective trauma goes way before the 20th century. I mean, if you look at your own country and its constant struggle for independence and its constant suffering under foreign occupation, it's the dominant theme in your history. That leaves its marks. And the other question is, what's the connection between individual trauma, individual illness, and collective trauma? There's a very interesting case in 1848. In 1848, there was a German physician. His name was Rudolf Virchow. And Virchow is one of the big names in the history of medicine. He's considered to be the father of modern pathology. His name is still revered in the annals of medicine. 1848, Virchow was a young doctor in Berlin, part of Prussia, and he was sent to Silesia. As you know, Silesia being, at that time, part of Prussia, part of Germany, but it's a Polish-speaking, Polish-populated area of miners mostly. And there was an outbreak of typhus. People were dying and falling ill of typhus. And Virchow was sent to Silesia to find the causes and to recommend measures to stop and prevent the epidemic. You know what he said? He recommended sanitary measures. He recommended free public education in Polish for both men and women. He recommended political and democratic freedoms. And he went back to Prussia, and they said, "What are you talking about? This is politics. We sent you to deal with the medical issue." And he says, "There's no difference." He says, politics is the continuation. Politics, if it does what it's supposed to do, it's the continuation of medicine and healing on a social level. He made no distinction between individual pathology and the oppression of a whole people. What is trauma? Trauma literally comes from a Greek word for wounding. So trauma is a wound. Trauma is a wound that hasn't healed. So that also means that trauma is not what happened to you. Trauma is what happened inside you as a result of what happened to you. So if I get a blow on the head, that's not the trauma. That's the traumatic event. The trauma is the concussion, the ongoing disturbance in my brain. That's what the trauma is. In my case, the trauma, well, let me tell you a story here. I'm just going to find an item here on my computer. When I was 2 years old, and maybe you've heard this story, if you've heard me talk before, I was 2 years old when the German army occupied Budapest. And we lived in Budapest, my mother and I. My father was away in forced labor with the Hungarian army. So the Wehrmacht marches into Budapest. And the day after the Wehrmacht marches into Budapest, my mother phoned the pediatrician to say, "Would you please come and see Gabor, because he's crying all the time." And the doctor says, "You know, of course I'll come to see him, but I should tell you, all my Jewish babies are crying. Now, what's that all about? What did I know as a 2-month-old about the coming genocide, which was coming? By that time, the Jewish population in Poland had been almost completely exterminated. And by the way, let me just go to a side here for a minute. We often talk about the Holocaust as if it was a specifically Jewish event. It wasn't. It was significantly aimed at Jews, of course, in the most horrible ways. I've never been to Auschwitz before, but I will be there in a couple of days. I'll go to Birkenau. I'll see the platform where my grandparents, my grandmother, my grandfather, and my aunt stepped off the train. Mengele, the infamous Nazi doctor, said, "Any doctors here?" My aunt put her hand up, my grandfather put her hand up, and he said, "Well, the older one should go this way. We can give you lighter duties. The younger one go this way." My aunt went this way, my grandparents went the other way to the gas chambers. So I'm not here to deny the significant Jewish dimension to the Holocaust, but let's not forget that 3 million Poles also died in the Holocaust, Russians, Roma people, other people, and I'm completely convinced that had Hitler succeeded in the war and had succeeded in his mad fantasy of killing all the Jews, the machinery of the Holocaust would have continued against the Slav people in general. So let's just not, the reason I talk about this is because when we talk about the Holocaust as a purely Jewish event, we actually take it outside of history. But let me ask you a question. Raise your hand if you knew that in the late 19th, early 20th centuries, the Belgians caused the death of 12 million people in the Congo. Raise your hand. It's pretty good, but it's a small minority. Raise your hand if you knew that in 1990s, we're talking 30 years ago, the Guatemalan army, with the training of the American and Israeli militaries, killed 100,000 native people. Raise your hand if you knew that. Very few. Raise your hand if you knew that after the Second World War, the great Democrats, the Dutch, killed nearly 300,000 people in Indonesia to try and maintain their colony. Did you know that? Again, a very few. Did you know that the first German genocide didn't take place with Jews as their victims, but black Africans in what is now Namibia? Why aren't we told these things? And why are all the powers that perpetrated these genocides in Latin America, in North America, in Africa, in India, why are they all supporting Israel now? Why is it a crime? It's almost a crime in Germany to criticize Israel. The Germans have the gall, the arrogance to tell German Jews who support Palestine that they're anti-Semites. Can you believe it? They haven't learned a thing. They have not learned a thing. Well, I was talking about trauma and why I was crying. Let me tell you, this is from a psychologist, and he writes, "The child is very open and can feel the pain and suffering going on in its immediate environment. The child is aware of his own body and can also feel the tension, rigidity, and pain in the body of the mother of anyone else he is with. If the mother is suffering, the baby suffers too. The pain never gets discharged. So that's what happened to me. And then when I was 11 months old, as I've said publicly before, my mother gave me to a complete stranger. I can go, in fact, next week I will go. I have 3 adult children. I'm going to show them Hungary for the first time. And I'll take them to the spot outside the very house on the very paving stones that are still there, where my mother handed me to a Christian woman in the street and begged her to take me to some relatives in hiding because she could not, I was very sick, she could not give me alive. So I didn't see her for 6 weeks. That wasn't a trauma. That was the traumatic event. The trauma is the wound that I sustained. The wound is who gets given away? Somebody who's not worth it. Somebody who's not lovable. That's the wound. Is the belief that you develop about yourself as a result of what happened to you. And I don't have to talk about the Nazis. Let me just tell you another story. I mentioned this in Mito de Normalści, I think my book is called, The Myth of Normal, my most recent book. I'm still in the maternity hospital with my mother. I'm 2 weeks of age. This is before the Nazis occupy Budapest, occupy Hungary. And I'm crying because I'm hungry. My mother doesn't feed me. She writes in her diary. She kept a diary. I still have it. My poor little son, you're really giving me what for? You're really complaining because you want to be fed. It's 12:30, but I promised the doctors I will only feed you every 4 hours. So I won't be able to feed you till 1 o'clock. My heart is breaking, she said, but you should learn that nighttime is for sleeping, not for eating. Now, you tell a mother cat to ignore their baby's hunger. You tell a mother orangutan to ignore their baby's distress. What message, forget the Nazis. What message does a 2-week-old baby get when they're not fed, when they're hungry? This is from a woman who loves me. But she is obeying medical authority, being the daughter of a doctor, especially. Doctor said, feed every 4 hours. The message the baby gets is, your feelings don't matter. You're all alone. The world is not here for you. That's the trauma. And then those traumas, those wounds, then show up decades later, even though you can't recall what happened. Because I don't recall not being fed by my mother. I don't recall being given to a stranger by my mother. Because the part of the brain that recalls, that calls back, isn't even online yet. It isn't developed yet. So there's no recall memory, but there's emotional memory. There's nervous system memory. Let me tell you, to this day, I'm sitting there in my computer working on the computer or reading a book, and my wife of 55 years walks into the room. All of a sudden, I go, now you know what that is? That is the startled response of an infant. If you take a small baby and you clap your hand loudly, they go. It's a nervous system response. But that brain, that nervous system response is stamped in my nervous system to this day. So that's how trauma shows up many, many, many years later. And I've often, the first book that I wrote was on attention deficit disorder, with which I was diagnosed in my 50s. And everybody says, all the experts say it's inherited brain disease. Well, first of all, it's not a disease. Secondly, it's not inherited. But that's what all the experts say. Genetic. And after I was diagnosed, so were a couple of my kids. This proves it. Father's got it, kid's got it, genetic brain disorder. But I started thinking about it. I thought, no, doesn't feel right. ADD, if you know anything about it, you're absent-minded, you tune out, you're disassociated. Now, what is that? If I were to stress you right now, to make you feel really uncomfortable, make you suffer maybe, you'd have three healthy options. One of them would be to ask for help, which is what the baby naturally does. That's what they do. Or, if you can, to escape or to fight back. But what if you're very stressed and you're a small child? You could be stressed because your parent is an alcoholic and they scream a lot. You could be stressed because your mother's depressed and they can't even look at you. You could be stressed because your parents are stressed and they don't get along and you're picking up on their stresses. But whatever the cause of the stress, how you deal with it is you dissociate. You tune out. That protects you from the suffering. And the problem, it's an adaptation, in other words. The problem with those early adaptations is they get wired into the brain, into the nervous system, and they stick around, they continue to be active when you don't need them anymore. And I could give you a much longer, much more detailed talk on mental illness, but I'm telling you, virtually every mental illness that you can name begins as an adaptation early in life. And of course, the medical profession is trained to see them only as genetic or biological brain diseases. We never say, what happened to this person that they developed this condition? Because here's the deal. I'm not going to give you any detailed lecture here now on brain development, but here's the actual scientific fact on brain development. The human brain develops in interaction with the environment. It's not even controversial. So the environment acting on the genes is what creates the circuitry of the brain, including the chemistry of the brain. So when circumstances are stressed, that develops different brains. That's how it works. And what about my kids? They didn't grow up in wartime, under racism, but they grew up in a home where the parents, I got bad news for everybody. Really bad news. You always marry somebody at the same level of trauma that you're at, okay? That's just the law. That means that our kids were raised by two very traumatized parents before we knew that. So we acted out our traumas in our marriage, in our relationship, in my personal life. I'm not going to go into all the details. My wife and I, we've been married 56 years, coming up in November. And it used to be a very difficult marriage until last week, I think. And so that's the circumstances. So of course they tune out. Now they're diagnosed with the same condition. So here's what I'm saying is, trauma is not what happened to you, it's what happened inside you as a result that hasn't healed yet, number one. Trauma can be individual or collective, and actually it's both, and trauma is multi-generational. That's what trauma is. I'll give you just two examples. One is that we've known for decades, lots of studies have shown that the more stressed parents are, the more likely the child is to have asthma. That's just a physiological fact. In fact, the more stressed parents are, the more medication a child will need for their asthma. That's one example. And I could give you dozens, hundreds. The other example is Black American women who suffer racism or experience of racism. The more experience of racism they have to endure, the greater the risk for asthma. Which then raises the question, is asthma a separate condition in an individual body part, or is it a social malaise? Well, it's both. It's both. One of the worst aspects, if you've been traumatized personally, if you've been abused personally, one of the worst aspects of it is that you're so alone with it. I'm not going to do this right now, but if I asked how many people here were, for example, sexually abused as children, some of you have put your hands up. This happens everywhere. Then if I asked you, who did you talk to about it? You'd say nobody. Because already as a child, you were so alone. And lots of people have had the experience that when even later they talk about these experiences, the family denies it. Nobody believes it. And that hurts so much. And one of the worst aspects of what we're seeing right now in this Zionism-Palestine conflict is the denial of Palestinian history. We make them into the perpetrators. They're the enemy. They started it. But let me tell you something. Way back in 1902, there was a Zionist leader who said, we have a problem here, because we keep talking about a land without a people for a people without a land. But there's no land without a people. There's a people living here, and they're not going to like it. Not only did he say that, David Ben-Gurion, who's from Poland, of course, the first Prime Minister of Israel, he said in the 1930s that we call the Arabs terrorists, but actually they're just fighting to hold on to their country. In their position, we would do the same thing. And Vladimir Jabotinsky, another Eastern European Jew who founded the revisionist wing of the Zionist movement, which has now become the governing part of Israel, the Likud party, he said the same thing. He said, of course they're fighting us. We're trying to take their land. Why wouldn't they fight us? There was none of this nonsense about they started it. They knew it. They just decided they were going to do it. And they did it with the utmost brutality. Israeli historians, a whole lot of them, Ilan Pape, Avi Schlein, Tom Segev, Shlomo Sand, Benny Morris, others have documented the deliberate killings of Palestinians in 1947-48, the rape of Palestinian women, the destruction of their homes, their brutal expulsion. And they've been doing it ever since. In 1956, Israel occupied Gaza during the war where Israel and Britain and France attacked Egypt, and Gaza had Egypt had control over Gaza. And there was an Israeli soldier killed by some Palestinian resistance people. And there was a funeral. And Moshe Dayan, who was General Moshe Dayan, who was defense minister of Israel at some point, he said, he's talking about Gaza. He said, why should we hate them? He said, they look across the barbed wire and they see the lands and the fields that we've taken away from them, and we don't let them come back. Of course they're fighting us. Now, he didn't mean that therefore we should give it back. Far from it. He just meant, let's understand where they're coming from. The first massacre, the first large-scale massacre of Palestinians by Israel did not begin in this century, even though there have been plenty of them. They've killed hundreds of Palestinians over the years with their bombs. Do you know that in 2019, 2020, I think it was, the people in Gaza, we always say, why didn't you fight non-violently? Well, in 2020, they marched unarmed, some of them in wheelchairs, some of them wearing their medical uniforms, up to the barbed wire to demonstrate for the right to return to their homelands that they could see with their eyes. And the Israeli army had a contest about who could shatter more Palestinian knees with their bullets. This was reported in the Israeli press, never reported in the West. And so what I'm saying is, to finish up this talk, is that apart from the shattering, inhumane, unspeakable horrors that are being visited on the Palestinians every day now, the worst part of it, at least here, when I say here, I mean in the West, apart from the collusion of all our governments with that crime against humanity, that Israelis are calling a crime against humanity, the worst part of it is the denial of Palestinian truth. The worst part of it is the denial of their peoplehood. The worst part of it is the denial of their culture. The worst part of it is the denial of the love of their lands, of their olive trees. You know why the settlers keep destroying Palestinian olive trees? Because the Palestinians love the olive trees. It speaks to them of their generations, of their history, of their belonging, of their attachment to their land. So the settlers love burning Palestinian olive trees. So what I'm saying to you is here's the sad truth. I've been talking about this issue quite a bit, for decades actually, but certainly since 2023. The talks that I've given have been seen by millions of people online. Other people have been talking, the historian Ilan Pape, the historian Avi Schleim, the great American scholar Norman Finkelstein, other Holocaust survivors who can't stand what's being done in their name. Palestinians have been talking, other people have been talking, journalists have been talking about it. And all the talking that we've done has not saved a single finger of a single Palestinian child. That's the sad truth. And Palestine and Gaza has the world's most number of amputated children. And you know how those limbs are amputated? Maybe you heard this. Without anesthetic. Imagine your leg being cut off without anesthesia, Because the Israelis don't let in medicines. You think this is reported here in the West? So what's my message? Learn the history. Speak the history. Don't be part of the silence. Don't be part of the conspiracy of denial, because we know where that leads to. And in the long term, I don't know what's going to happen. They captured the ship. In fact, if they haven't yet, they will. They might succeed. They might succeed in killing enough Palestinians. And, I saw pictures of Warsaw, especially the ghetto area, right after the war, flat. That's what Gaza looks like. Deliberate attacks on hospitals, the capture and torture to death of doctors. Maybe they'll succeed this time. But there's a longer issue here. There's a longer issue that goes back many thousands of years. Certainly it's the theme that I mentioned in Polish history, that unshakable desire for freedom. Your ex-president, Lech Walesa, is now touring or about to tour North America to talk about the struggles in Gdansk and against tyranny. So that yearning for human freedom, for human dignity, for liberty, for justice, that's what's miraculous. That despite all the historical events and all the powers that have been mobilized to crush the spirit of liberty out of people, they've never succeeded. And no matter what happens in Gaza right now, they'll never succeed in extirpating and crushing that desire for freedom. And that's a struggle that's going to go on for a long time, beyond my lifetime and beyond your lifetime. But there was a great Jewish rabbi around the time of just a few decades after Jesus. His name was Rabbi Tarfon, and he said, the task of healing the world, he said, the task is not yours to finish, but neither are you free not to take part in it. So that's the challenge for all of us, to take part in that ages-old struggle for truth. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Oh, this is so lovely. Well done. So then we'll open it up to questions, and I will translate.
Yeah.
Polish questions.
That's fine, yeah.
So, thank you very much, everybody. I think Gabor really appreciated that standing ovation. My name is Ewa Jasiewicz. I am Polish, but born in the UK. I have been active on Palestine for 23 years. My father was a soldier of occupation in Palestine, based in Gaza in 1942. And I've been to Gaza and worked with paramedics, volunteering during Operation Cast Lead. I've also volunteered with paramedics in Jenin, not long after the massacre in 2002. I've also been an organizer with the Freedom Flotilla to Gaza in 2010 and 11. And a question that I want to start off this discussion, this collective discussion that we can have for Gabor, relates particularly to Palestinian agency and Palestinian resistance to erasure. I wanted to also add that I'm part of Cactus Initiative, which is a Polish Palestinian justice initiative led by a Palestinian activist, Ala Kandil, and then a collective working together to support Palestinian genocide survivors from Gaza who have Polish citizenship and have managed to come here. And a really important part of your work that you've talked about in terms of what it takes to heal trauma, being connection and being able to rebuild human connection, is it's an important lesson that is being completely denied in terms of how Israel is severing the connection between Palestinians for the last 80 years. Despite all of this erasure and genocide since 48 and before, Palestinians, despite mass incarceration, turned prisons into universities. In the first Intifada, the denial of children to go to school and to universities, people opened up their homes and using the tactic of mujawara, to neighboringness, to organize schools and educate. Despite the assassination of writers, of artists, Palestinians have continued to create and to organize. And now what we're seeing in Gaza is 1,200 entire bloodlines, entire families obliterated, thousands of children, wounded child with no surviving family. So this connection that Palestinians had and continue to have to foster the insistence on liberation is being physically, murderously severed all the time, not to mention the denial of the right of return. So my question is, how does everybody here connect to Palestinian resistance and the commitment to liberation? How do we practice it to uplift it and support it at this time of genocide?
Yeah. Well, I don't know what the situation here in Poland is. I'll tell you what happens in Canada. In Canada, if you're a teacher who mentioned Palestine, you get disciplined. You're making the Jewish students feel unsafe. I know several doctors in Canada who've lost their positions, academics who've lost their positions. This is in a so-called democratic state with free speech. In the United States, it's massive. The intimidation is massive. Academics, physicians, Jewish academics who speak out on behalf of Gaza are fired. That's the situation right now. It's like a dictatorship. I don't know what the situation here in Poland is. I don't know whether your regime, your government here is as committed to the Zionist project as the North American and Western European governments are. I can't tell you what to do, but my best suggestion is don't try to act alone. The more alone you are, the more vulnerable you are. So that if you're committed to doing something about this, do it in organized groups. Do it as a communal effort. Do it publicly. And do it expecting the usual opposition and be prepared to be slandered with being anti-Semites. Be prepared for that, because you will be. It's a really good tactic. Who wants to be an anti-Semite these days? Who wants to be associated with one of the ugliest ideologies and greatest crimes in history? So it's an effective tactic. Don't allow yourself to be intimidated by that. Get to know the history. Read those Israeli historians, I don't know if they've been translated into Polish, who've shown the actual history of Palestine. Read the Palestinians' history of themselves. Educate yourself. And if you're going to act, gather friends around you. Don't try and isolate yourself. And be prepared to lose some friendships. Because this is one of the most emotional issues in the world right now. I totally understand how many of my fellow Jews just see the Palestinians as another bunch of enemies that are trying to destroy us. I can understand it. It's nonsense, but I can understand it. So if you're going to engage in this struggle, try and be as compassionate as you can be to all sides. Be as understanding as you can, without, however, sacrificing your principles and without surrendering the truth that you know to be true. So that's very general and I don't think very adequate advice, but that's the best I can say.
And one more question before I hand it over to the room, which is, what does it mean for you to be here in Poland, and particularly for the context of Poland, to be able to stand up for another people that are facing genocide now in a country which experienced genocide and which also saw resistance to that genocide, to the Holocaust, and the authoring of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the Genocide Convention. Rafał Lemkin was one of the authors of this, and the term genocide, Jewish, Polish scholar. And at the same time, we have a government that is arming Israel, that has strong political, diplomatic ties with the state of Israel, gave immunity to Benjamin Netanyahu. When there's an international arrest warrant out for him, he was invited to come to Poland for the liberation of Auschwitz, annual ceremony.
Is that even before the new election, or?
This was just in January.
January, okay.
So there is an obscene collaboration. Sorry? An obscene collaboration between the Polish state. Also, the media is completely silent. And I feel like you're moved by like an ancestral duty or like a spirit. And I feel that too. And I feel a lot of people here feel that sense of not just a moral responsibility to act and prevent. There's a legal duty to prevent genocide on Poland and all signatories to the Rome Statute, but a kind of spiritual connection and duty towards doing this to make never again more than words, but the reality that it needs to be for everyone.
So I brought 2 jackets on this trip. I'm wearing one of them. The other one is back at the hotel. I'm going to Hungary after I leave Poland, and I'll be giving a public talk there, not about Palestine, but I'll mention Palestine. The Hungarian government is another one that invited that war criminal Netanyahu to visit. And let me read you something from this wonderful book I already quoted. It's called One Day Everyone Will Have Been Against This by Omar El-Akkad. And he says, see, this is Western civilization, you see? This is Western civilization. You know what happened when Mahatma Gandhi was once asked about what he thinks about Western civilization? You know what he said? He said, "I think it would be a good idea." You're talking about the most barbaric governments in the world. If you visit England, and you go where you live, and you go to Trafalgar Square, there's all these statues to all these mass murderers that have killed hundreds of thousands in Africa and India. This is the civilized world. And Omar al-Akkad writes, to preserve the values of the civilized world, he's talking about Gaza. To preserve the values of the civilized world, it is necessary to set fire to a library, to blow up a mosque, to incinerate olive trees, to dress up in the lingerie of women who fled, to level universities, to loot jewelry, art, banks, and food, to arrest children for picking vegetables, to shoot children for throwing stones, to parade the captured in their underwear. You've seen the pictures. Palestinians are captured. They have to dress naked, actually. Dr. Adnan al-Bashir, who was the head of orthopedic surgery at Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza, a beautiful man, 5 young children, an athlete, very healthy, age 50, 51. He was abducted from the operating room in December of 2023. He died at the infamous Ofer prison in Israel. They said he was without his underwear. They tortured him to death. To shoot children for throwing stones, to capture them and to parade the captured in their underwear, to break a man's teeth and shove a toilet brush in his mouth, to set combat dogs loose on a man with Down syndrome and then leave him to die. Otherwise, the uncivilized world might win. So this is the civilized world. And this is your civilized government here in Poland. And this is my civilized government here in Canada and all over the Western world. So I think when you ask me how to confront that, I think the main thing is to realize what lesson does it teach us about the nature of our societies and who's in power and what values they hold. So I think at the very least, we can use this experience as an education. What you do with it, I can't here prescribe what you should do in Poland. I really can't. But at least wake up, not just to the horror that is Gaza, but to the civilized world that is making it happen.
Thank you. So has anyone got a question? I saw this hand come up straight away. So Anya and Łukasz are going to be going around with microphones. And you can ask your question in English or Polish. If you're more comfortable in Polish, I'll translate to Gabor.
Great, thank you so much for coming. My name is Helena, and I'm a mom to an 11-year-old boy who is mixed. His father is Tanzanian. And until he was 3, we stayed in Africa, and then we came here to Poland. I have 2 questions, and the first one is, well, outside of this bubble, which is Mokotów district where we stay, we have to sometimes commute, and that's where he experiences racism. And that's aggressive words, sometimes quite outrageous. I think it's no secret that we in this minority or in mixed families community tell our children, don't fight back. Be an ambassador of peace. They could blow it out of proportions if you fight back, if you say anything back. But you mentioned it's natural to fight back. So my first question is, if I say that to my son, do not fight back, is it healthy? Is it healthy? Sorry? When we tell our children in the mixed families, community, do not fight back, is it healthy for them, for our mixed children, not to fight back racism? That's my first question.
Okay. Can you summarize that for me?
Sorry. Sorry for my English.
And he's getting bullied for racist. He's getting bullied.
Yeah.
And he's facing oppression.
Yeah.
And her question is, kind of raised to kind of play nice and don't fight back. But is that healthy? Is it healthy for her to say, don't fight back to her son, to keep the peace?
How old is your son?
11. And then the second question is...
Okay, well, wait.
Oh, sorry.
Let me answer the
sure,
first one.
of course.
I'll let you have two, but everyone else gets one.
So, I would never advise a kid to fight back. He might not be ready for it. He might get beaten up even worse. That's not the most important thing. I'll tell you something, this may not apply to your son, and if not, don't believe me, okay? I'm just giving you something general. I was going to write a book about bullying once, and I did a lot of research. And the bully is somebody who exploits somebody's vulnerability to gain dominance, to make themselves bigger. So the bully is very often somebody who feels very bad about themselves. And if you look at the literature on bullying, the mental health outcomes of kids who are bullied without support and the bullies are the same. So the bullying comes from a very negative place inside the bully. But the bullying is the exploitation of somebody else's vulnerability for the sake of gaining dominance. Now, the issue is the child's vulnerability. And the way to protect the child against the impact of bullying is to strengthen his sense of himself. Not because he can fight back and beat them up. I mean, if he can, good, but not because of that. Because if he is no longer vulnerable, the bully will not find him very interesting. Now, as I mentioned, I had some anti-Semitic attacks when I was a kid, but I was never bullied. Because I felt pretty good about myself. In fact, I would stand up for the kids that were being bullied. What your son needs is a strong sense of himself, and you can give him that. And how you give him that, and again, if this doesn't apply to you, if it doesn't make sense, just forget it. I'm talking very generally. But what I've seen of kids who get habitually bullied, and they could be mixed race or any race, is that they don't have a strong enough sense of themselves. And that's what the bully picks up on and exploits. So how you support his strength of himself, his sense of himself, is by really listening to his emotions. When he comes home and tells you about it, that's wonderful that he tells you about it. Because a lot of kids won't even tell their parents. They just suffer in silence. If your child is talking to you, that's already a really good sign. So what you need to do is not to give him strategies, but to really listen and say, yeah, that really hurts, doesn't it? That makes you angry, doesn't it? And give them a hug and enjoy them and make them feel good about themselves. That's the best way to deal with it, I would say. You can see, and there's a book that I helped to write. The English title is Hold On to Your Kids. I know it's been published into Polish. I think the Polish title means Connection. I think that book would help you a lot. That's the best I can tell you. Okay?
Thank you so much. I still have the second question, though. And this is because, he has been persevering all these situations for quite a while. And recently we watched the visit of South African president to Donald Trump. And that's where there were displayed pictures of Julius Malema's movement, where they were chanting, "Kill the Boer." And to my surprise, to my outrage, my son said, finally someone is doing something with it. And I said, what? Kill the Boer? It means kill the white, I told him. Your mommy is white. Yeah. And my son said, yeah, but you don't understand. My forefathers for hundreds of years have been suffering from white people.
Yeah.
And you mentioned for a little moment about you going through Zionism, and I wonder, how do I prevent radicalization for my son?
Okay. What emotion do you think your son is expressing? What emotion do you think your son is expressing? He's expressing rage. He's expressing anger. He's entitled to it. Nothing wrong with it. Don't worry. He's not going to become a mass murderer, okay? But you listen to him and you say, boy, you must be really angry. Yeah, I get it. Boy, you must really hate those people. Yeah, I get it. That's how you deal with it. Allow him his emotion. Understand it. Validate it. And then move on. Don't try to give him an ideological lecture on brotherhood, okay? Just listen to his emotions. They're there. And they're not just about the Boers, they're also about his own pains and, so just listen to him, okay? All right, thanks.
Hi, I guess my question is really simple,
Yeah. Good.
but complicated at the same time.
Okay.
So my question is, how do we make people who don't want to see the truth? And I guess I'm speaking in the context of what's happening in Palestine now. So yeah, my question is, how do we make people who don't want or don't see the truth see the truth?
Yeah. So, I hate to tell you this, but 3 days ago, Iga Swiatek played a tennis game in Paris against Arina Sabalenko from Belarus, and Iga lost. I think a lot more people, Polish people, were upset about her loss than they're upset about Gaza. And the same thing is true internationally. If you have a TV program in North America about which sports star is dating which musical pop star, millions of people will read and watch about it. Gaza, not so much. And there's nothing you can do about it. You have to deal with your own frustration. You can't make people care who don't care. You can't make people listen who don't listen. In my own family, for a long time, I was pretty much alone with how I saw things. It's not that way anymore. There's nothing I could do to convince anybody. facts don't matter. People's opinions or what they care about or what they don't care about is much more based in their deepest emotions and their unconscious. And you can't argue with people's unconscious. You just can't. And if you get frustrated and attack them, they will shrink back even more. So I'm afraid that the best you can do is to speak as openly and as kindly and as truthfully as you can. But you can't make anybody do anything. You just can't. And don't even think that you can. Because all you're going to do is suffer. There's a, baseball is an American sport. You probably don't know much about baseball, but the Americans are really great that way. For many years, they're the only country in the world that played baseball. But when they have the championship, they call it the World Series. What are you talking about, World Series? You're the only country. Football, the whole world, but baseball. Anyway, there was a great American baseball coach called Yogi Berra, and he said once, if the people don't want to go to the ball game, there's nothing you can do to stop them. See if you can understand that one. If the people don't want to go to the game, there's nothing you can do to stop them. If the people don't want to listen to you, there's nothing you can do to make them. And believe me, I've tried. Okay. Hi, wherever the mic is.
Thank you. I'm wondering whether you would comment on this victim-perpetrator connection.
Sure.
In terms of history of Jews and Arabs. And do you see the connection between two religions, like Yahweh and Allah? They are both kind of teaching their children to hate each other, basically, and they both see themselves as a chosen nations.
Yeah. All right. First of all, victimhood is a big theme in history. Now, I'm from Hungary, and the Hungarian national anthem is the most lugubrious, self-pitying national anthem in the whole world. You know what it goes? You see, when a Polish athlete wins a gold medal, or a Russian one, or an American, or a French, they go on the podium and they play this triumphant national anthem. When a Hungarian wins a gold medal, they play the Hungarian national anthem. The words include, "This is a nation whom misfortune has torn apart forever. And we've already paid for all the sins of the past and the future." Talk about self-pity. Now, the fact is, in Eastern Europe, as almost anywhere in the world, there's been a lot of victimization. Yeah, the Hungarians have been victims of history. They were occupied by the Turks for 100 years, then by the Austrians, and the Russians intervened a couple of times. I don't have to tell you about Polish history, from the partition in the 18th century to the oppression in the 19th century, then let alone what happened in the Second World War here. There's a lot of genuine victimization. For sure, the Jews have been victimized. I mean, it's horrible what happened to Jews historically in many places. Not everywhere. Not so much in the East, but certainly here in the West. The problem is not the historical facts. The problem is the self-identity. Now, if you look at the Hindu yogic understanding of the mind, it's got these four dynamics. There's memory, there's awareness, there's the intellect that can discern, and there's identification. And most people, in personal life and in political life, it's how they identify that's the problem. Not the facts, but how they identify. So you can be Hungarian and know all that history, but not identify as a victim. You can be a Pole, knowing all the difficult, heroic, and tragic history, and not identify as a victim. You can be a Jew and know all that tragic history and heroic history, and not identify as a victim. But if you identify as a victim, then all you see is enemies out there. And that's the problem. It's the identification. Now, as to what you said about Palestinians, I hate to tell you, it's not true. Now I know, Ewa, you just spent time, did you not, with Nurit Peled? Wasn't that you?
Natalia
That was
did
Natalia?
over there.
Okay, so Nurit Peled is an Israeli academic. Her child was killed by a suicide bomber, by a Palestinian suicide bomber. Her father was a general in the Israeli army, Mati Peled. I met him. He was one of the first ones before it was even possible to talk about negotiations, to talk about two states, and he did. Now, he also took part in the Nakba. But later on, he realized, can't go that way anymore. Nurit is his daughter. Her brother is Miko Peled, who's an Israeli. He wrote a book called Son of a General. He's a complete supporter of Palestinian rights. And Nurit did a study of Palestinian schools. They don't teach their kids to hate the Jews. They don't. They teach what happened. What happened was the Nakba. But they don't teach hatred. It's not true. Number one. As a matter of fact, I know Palestinian professors of poetry in Gaza who taught Hebrew poetry to their kids. That's the reality. Now, what does happen to Palestinian kids is when the only Jews they see are wearing a uniform, and the only Jews they see are beating up their parents, or arresting their parents and take them away to be tortured, then how are you supposed to and they're saying this, and they're wearing the Star of David, and they're saying we're doing this in the name of the Jewish people and the Jewish state. What is that Palestinian kid supposed to think? But I'll tell you what's surprising. I can tell you this personally. I can tell you this from any number of Jewish friends or people that I know who've been to Palestine. We don't meet any hatred. We greet it with open arms, whether they know we're Jews or not. Now, do some Palestinians hate Jews? Sure they do. But if all the time they're told that what's being happened to them is being done in the name of the Jewish people, why would they not hate the Jews? What's surprising is how many of them they don't. That's what's surprising. So, to sum up, this identification with victimhood, whether you're a Pole or you're Russian or a Jew or an Arab or a Hungarian, it's toxic. We have to make a distinction between historical facts and what we identify with and how we see ourselves at. So the problem is not history, the problem is our identification. And you know who one of the biggest victims in the world is? The President of the United States. Everybody's his enemy. Everybody's against him. You know, he said once that the world is a horrible place. He said this. The world is a horrible place. Everyone is against you. Dog eat dog. He says, your friends, they want your wealth, they want your house, they want your wife. This is your friends. Now, and if you believe that, if that's how the world is, then how are you going to have to be? You're going to have to be aggressive and a bully and greedy and selfish and insensitive. In other words, you get to be president of the United States. There's a book written by his niece, Mary Trump, who I met recently in Washington. She's a psychologist. And she describes how Trump was traumatized by his father, who Mary calls a sociopath. I'm not going to go into the details. Mary's father, Trump's brother, drank himself to death. He became an alcoholic in response to the trauma. Trump's response to being victimized was to make sure that he's the biggest, most powerful, and most feared person so that nobody dare bully him. So that sense of victimhood, it can make you weak, it can make you self-pitying, it can make you ineffective, or it can make you into a huge bully. The problem is the identification with victimhood. I hope that answers your question.
I can see lots of hands. I'm also wondering, I'm curious if there are Palestinian...
Oh, by the way, let me just say one more thing. The idea about victimhood is not that you deny what happened. You don't deny what happened. The problem is that you say, I am this way and I can't be any other way because of what happened to me. In other words, you wear your victimhood like a badge. That's what the problem is. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Thank you. I think we've got someone here, and I also really want to invite Palestinian folks that have come today to also raise their hand and contribute to, if you feel like it. So yeah,
You said that it's impossible not to look at the things that's happening right there. My question is how to deal with the sense of helplessness and this overwhelming feeling that you can't really do anything about it. Only sharing the informations, obviously the community and help in those places, but how to deal with this enormous feeling of helplessness.
Yeah, well, it's almost impossible to escape the sense of helplessness these days, because like I said earlier, of all the movements, all the demonstrations, all the public speaking, all the information, none of it has made any difference. And every day, you see them massacring. I mean, yesterday they killed another 95 people. The world just watches. How do you not feel helpless? I have two answers to that. None of them are satisfactory, as far as I'm concerned, but they're the only ones I have. One is, don't give them that victory. They want you to feel helpless. That's exactly how they want you to feel. Don't give in to that. You can be realistic without taking on a stance, an identity of helplessness. You can say, what I've done so far hasn't saved any lives. Maybe what I do next week will not save any lives, but that does not make me helpless. It just makes me ineffective right now, but I'm not going to give it up. So don't give them the victory of being overcome by that sense of helplessness. Number one. Number two, maybe if this helps you, maybe think about what I said earlier, that Gaza is the issue, but there's a longer and ongoing issue of human dignity and human freedom. And you're contributing to that. It's like a little light that you're holding up. And that's going to go on for a long time yet. And it's not personal to you and I. So from that point of view, it doesn't matter what losses or defeats one may experience, but if one is committed to contribute to that human light, be assured that in future generations, others will pick up that same torch. So you're contributing to something much larger than just what's happening right now. I wish I could give you a more satisfactory answer, but that's what I think.
Hello.
Hi.
I'm very grateful that I'm here and I can ask this question. What is your tip for a long relationship?
For what?
A long relationship.
Relationship?
Yeah.
Like a romantic
Marriage
relationship.
or something.
Like marriage.
Marriage, isn't it?
Like marriage, romance, romantic relationship.
What is your daily routine to feel good together? Thank you very much.
Well, I'll tell you two things about relationships. I could tell you many things. One of them, as I already said, you're always going to find somebody at the same level of trauma that you're at. Okay? That's just a law. People that say, you know, my husband was so traumatized, but I wasn't, you know, I said, oh my God, you're number one. Number two, it depends what you see as the purpose of marriage. It could be to have a nice life, to have kids, to accumulate certain goods, enjoy yourselves. Well, that's nice. Good luck. On a deeper level, marriage is an opportunity to grow, to mature, to find yourself. Now, when my wife, Ray, met me when I was 22 and she was 18, she said, she told me since, she said, I saw your darkness and I saw your light, and my role was to help dissipate the darkness, now to help to shine light. Now she's done that, but I would not advise anybody else to try, because it's not your job to make somebody else okay. It's their job. So the real task of marriage is that both people should grow up together, should learn together. And there's an American psychologist who defined love as the willingness to extend yourself in order to further the spiritual growth of the other person, but mutually. So the thing that has made our marriage work after all these years of stress and love and stress and struggle and joy is we're both really committed to the truth. So ultimately, the truth mattered to us more than being right. Eventually, whoever of us needs to gives up being right if the truth is otherwise. I'll tell you something else, that my wife and I both agree. One of my children, when they were 9 years old, they came to me and they said, Dad, I wish you and my mom would get a divorce. And I said, why do you say that? She said, I don't know, but I think my life would be better. And they were right. At a certain point, the way I was, as a workaholic doctor and full of anger, it would have been better for our children, for my wife to have left me, for their sake. No, she didn't, and we worked it out and so on, but it has its consequences on our kids. So, what's my advice here? If you're going to get married, decide what your goals are. And the primary goal is, can we grow together? And growing means being honest with each other. And being honest with each other is, can we listen to the other person's truth? And can we absorb it? And can we learn from it? One person can't do that work on their own. So when you think of a long-term relationship, yeah, it's nice to have these material goals of happiness and children and whatever, but there needs to be an underlying higher level spiritual, psychological growth of truth and growth. That's what I would tell you. Okay?
First off, I'd like to start off by thanking you for your support and sharing our stories. For us as Palestinians, that means a lot, and thank you so much for your bravery. As for my question, it's more related to a part of your speech that you mentioned earlier. There are other massacres that have happened throughout history, and the correlation that not a lot of people know about it comes down to where we're from. As a Palestinian, as an African or a brown person in general, we are held at a different standard point when it comes to international law, to the Western media, etc. So my question is, what can we do as human beings, no matter where we're from, what our ethnicity is and all that, to change the narrative?
Well, you can do what a lot of people, I mean, what's interesting now is in the last couple of years, there's been a much more attention being paid to Palestinian literature, for example, than there used to be. I'm talking at least in North America. There's a Palestinian writer that just won the Pulitzer Prize. There's been a discovery of Palestinian poetry, of non-fiction writing. You can't change people's interest. You cannot change their identification. But there's a wonderful book by a Palestinian. I don't know if it's appeared in Polish. His name is Mohammed El-Kurd. Do you know that name? Mohammed El-Kurd. He's a poet. He's 24 years old. And he wrote a book called The Perfect Victim. It's about the Palestinian experience. There's this book that I mentioned called One Day Everyone Will Have Been Against This. I quoted from it by Omar Al-Akkad. What am I talking about? Self-expression. Self-expression. And what's changed over the last decade or so, it used to be that when you have these Israeli spokesmen, they always spoke with perfect English accents. Of course they're from Britain and South Africa and the United States. And the Palestinian Palestinian representatives always spoke with this broken English. They didn't sound right. What's changed now, part of it because of the dispersion, is that there's a lot more Palestinians living in the West who speak perfect English, who are as literarily accomplished as anybody, who can express themselves, and who can speak for themselves. I just say keep doing that. Now, when people will listen, or who will listen, that's not up to you. You just can't change that. But you can not allow yourself to be intimidated and not allow yourself to be categorized as the other, as inferior. You can do that. Okay?
Okay. My question would be about the feeling of guilt whenever you just live in life, you're having fun, you're eating. Sometimes I feel guilt for eating and knowing that other people are not somewhere in the world. Having fun while people are being killed, being massacred. The feeling of shame. So I wanted to ask you about how can I deal with this feeling that it's actually like eating me from inside.
All right. Where are you? Can I see you? Okay, thank you. So I'll tell you something about myself. I had breakfast this morning. I woke up, I had breakfast. And then I had lunch. Tell me that I'm guilty. Tell me that I'm guilty and I should be ashamed of myself. I'm asking you to tell me that. If you believe it.
I don't believe that other people are guilty.
Oh, you don't believe it. Uh-huh. Did you have breakfast this morning?
Yes.
Are you guilty?
Yes.
Oh, so you're guilty and I'm not. Can you explain why not? What gives me the privilege of not being guilty and you the sin of being guilty?
It's not a privilege, but I would say more the I don't know. I just feel guilty.
I'm just asking you, no, by the way, guilty is not really a feeling, okay? It's a belief. Tell me that I'm guilty because I had breakfast this morning and I'm gonna have dinner tonight. Tell me, Gabor, you're guilty. You should be ashamed of yourself.
No, I will not.
Then what makes you so special? You know what? I totally understand what you're saying. I'm not making fun of you. But guilt is completely misplaced. We're human beings. Who would it help if you starved yourself to death? Who would it help? Would it save one life? Would it put another meal into the mouth of a Palestinian child? So that this sense of guilt has nothing to do with reality. And if I were to do a therapeutic session with you, I would ask you this sense of guilt, how it feels in your body. Is it new or do you know it from before? Did it start with Gaza or did you have it before?
It started when I knew that there was a Palestinian cause and people are actually living this for years.
So
and it's more now.
Okay, so what you have is empathy. It's not guilt, it's empathy. You wish it wasn't happening. You wish there was more you could do. You're outraged. You're in grief. Your heart is breaking. That's all true. But guilt has nothing to do with it. And I would ask you to drop that guilt. It's not helping you. It's not helping anybody else either. And again, either everybody here is guilty, including me, or you're not guilty either. Turn that guilt, if you have it, into doing what you can do, whatever it is. Maybe you can do little, maybe you can do much. If there are things you could be doing, if there's money you could donate, but you don't because you want to buy a new car, or because you want to eat at a fancy restaurant, if there are things you could do that you're not doing, that's different. Then you can just think about that and say, well, what can I do? But guilt, because they're suffering and you're not, you don't deserve that. Okay?
Thank you. So this is going to be the last question. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Deep acknowledgement for your work and deep gratitude for the way you share it. I'm a survivor of, I'm a descendant of a survivor of the Polish uprising. My grandmother was fighting the Polish...
In 1944, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
She survived 2 concentration camps. It's just a miracle that my mother was born and I'm alive. And ever since I became a mom, which was 20 years ago, I became really very uneasy about there's something not well in my body. So I started healing, and I've been healing myself, my family for the last 20 years using a lot of modalities. And I've come a long way. And right now I'm coming from a place of being an ancestral lineage healing practitioner. I'm very passionate about that. It's a spiritual practice that empowers people to do their own healing. And noticing that you've experienced the Eternal Song conference, and I'm sure you listened to so much wisdom of indigenous peoples that address their ancestral people. They call in their spirits and they heal. Could you speak any fresh thoughts that you have on this? On how to relate the connectivity to our ancestors that are on the other side without their physical bodies in healing our own trauma that it lives in our physical body.
2 ancestors?
So she's asking about how connected, do you have any insights to share on how you connect to your ancestors or the idea of ancestral healing?
Okay, thank you. I'm not the right person to ask. You're right. There's this movie project called The Eternal Song. It's on YouTube, it's on the internet. It was made by the same people who came to Palestine with me and did that film called Where the Olive Trees Weep that I mentioned. And what happened before then is that they made a film about my work called The Wisdom of Trauma, which has been seen by 15 million people around the world. And after the success of The Wisdom of Trauma, they said to me, what should we do a film about next? And I said, well, why don't you do it on indigenous people? So that's why they came to Palestine, actually, when I went there. But then they traveled to Greenland, to northern Canada, to the Amazon jungle, to Africa, to Asia, to Australia, New Zealand, and everywhere they filmed indigenous people and indigenous healers, indigenous ceremonies. And it's called The Eternal Song. Do you realize that in Australia, the Aboriginal people have lived there for 60,000 years? 60,000 years. Now, I don't know when the Poles came to Poland, but it wasn't 60,000 years ago. And you think Hungarians came 1,200 years ago? Hungary presents itself as the boundary, the bulwark, the defense of the West against Eastern immigrants. But who the hell are the Hungarians? They're Eastern immigrants who came from Asia. And now they're defending, anyway, to go back to your question. And all these ancient traditions, from Greenland to South America to New Zealand, it's all about connections with the ancestors. So they keep talking about the grandmothers and the grandfathers and the ancestors. They're so conscious of the ancestors. They're so conscious of the relationship with their ancestors. There's a ceremony in North America called a sweat lodge. It's a tent covered with heavy material. There's a deep pit, a hole in the middle. It's airtight, and they heat these rocks till they're red hot. Then they take these shovels and they drag these rocks into the pit, and then they put water on them. You get all this steam, you're on this heat, and then they chant. But when they bring in the rocks, they say, "Here come the grandmothers and the grandfathers." So their ancestors are not only their human predecessors, it's also the earth and the rock. It's a totally different way of understanding the world. And with the Western intellect, you think about it, what are they talking about? Why are they calling these rocks their ancestors? But when you think about it, they are. Where do our bodies come from, if not from the earth? Of course the earth is our ancestor. Of course the rocks are our ancestors. So it's a totally different way of being in the world. It's a totally different way of understanding where you stand in relationship to nature and to the people that came before you. And they speak of the ancestors with such respect and such honor. Now, here's my problem. I can intellectually understand it and emotionally even appreciate it, but except a couple of times with psychedelic plants, I've never had that sense of connection, and I still don't. I just don't. My mind just doesn't go there. Even though I get it and I respect it, I don't know what to tell you about it. Except that in this movie, The Eternal Song, you can find it on the internet as well. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful film. If that calls you, if that connection makes sense to you, not just intellectually, but deeply, then you can find it. Then you can find teachers and shamans and songs and experiences that'll connect you with the ancestors. But I'm not the one who can tell you how. I'm just not. Okay? Okay.
Yeah. So we would love to continue, but the time is up. We're incredibly grateful that Gabor is here in Poland. Tomorrow he's in Krakow, Tuesday Wrocław, Łódź Wednesday, Poznań Thursday, back to Warsaw on Friday, and then Hungary on Saturday. So Gabor's going to be here for a week. So keep up on social media with the Instagram account, Gabor Maté Tour. What is it again? Dr. Gabor Maté Poland. We also have a stall with Gabor's books. Please have a look at that. And there are t-shirts for sale as well that are going to go towards the tour. And any leftover funds are going to go to Compassionate Hearts Gaza, which is a charity set up by Mohammed al-Mughrabi, a Palestinian doctor that we are in community with. And yeah, Gabor, we're just so grateful that you're here. And this is Gabor's first time here. Będą te kwiaty?